Formula One will introduce major regulation changes in the 2026 season, officially bringing an end to the ground effect era that has been in place since 2022. This regulation package was originally expected to last much longer, even alongside future engine changes. But in reality, the ground effect concept will only survive for 4 seasons before being completely overhauled next year. One of the main reasons is that the ground effect cars were never truly favored by the drivers or many of the teams. FIA and Formula One eventually listened to their feedback and decided to remove the concept starting in 2026. It's no secret that ground effect cars have been widely criticized for being less enjoyable to drive, often giving drivers a negative and uncomfortable feeling on track. Fernando Alonso and Max Verstappen are 2 drivers who have been very vocal in criticizing ground effect cars, describing them as too heavy, overly sensitive, and lacking agility through corners. Even for Verstappen, a driver who achieved massive success during this era, the ground effect cars were never enjoyable to drive. He has openly admitted that he had to adapt, and even slightly change his driving style, just to fully control and extract performance from them. At the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, cameras caught an interesting moment in the cool-down room, when Oscar Piastri said to Verstappen that at least they won't have to drive this generation of cars anymore in the future. So the question is, why are ground effect cars so widely disliked? And what exactly makes them a generation that drivers won't miss once 2026 arrives? Introduced in 2022, the ground effect regulations were built on a genuinely noble goal: to create better racing. The idea was to generate stronger downforce while reducing dirty air, allowing drivers to follow each other much more closely through corners without losing balance. The early impressions were indeed positive. We saw thrilling battles between Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen in the opening rounds, and the midfield suddenly became far more competitive and unpredictable. However, that promise didn't last long. Soon after, Red Bull began to dominate, followed more recently by McLaren. While the 2025 season delivered peak excitement with a title fight that went down to the final round, the reality is that most races still felt relatively flat. Much of the drama came from Max Verstappen's incredible post-summer break form rather than consistent wheel-to-wheel racing. As development progressed, the dirty air problem, which was initially reduced, slowly returned. Today, it's almost as severe as it was with the previous generation of cars, once again making overtaking extremely difficult. This has led many to label ground effect as a failed concept in modern Formula One, and there are several reasons behind that opinion. The first, and most frequently mentioned by drivers, is the car's handling, specifically its strong understeer, and the significant adaptation required in driving style. Ground effect cars naturally tend to understeer because the majority of their downforce is generated in the middle of the floor and towards the rear, underneath the diffuser. This concentrates the aerodynamic balance toward the rear of the car, making understeer the default behavior, especially in slow corners. This is where the main problem begins. To counter understeer, teams increase front wing downforce, but that often makes the front tires overly sensitive, particularly in medium and high-speed corners, leading to sudden oversteer. Some modern generation drivers like Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, and George Russell have managed to adapt well to this understeer-heavy nature without relying too much on extreme front wing sensitivity. Even so, adaptation comes at a cost. They've had to compromise their natural approach to slow corners. Verstappen and Norris, for example, were forced to reduce their aggression on corner entry to meet the aerodynamic demands of ground effect cars, allowing the balance shift to happen more smoothly. Both found ways to remain aggressive under braking, but with much gentler steering inputs to overcome understeer. The situation is very different for drivers like Lewis Hamilton, and in the most extreme case, Daniel Ricciardo. Hamilton has never fully unlocked the ground effect cars with his naturally aggressive slow corner style. After moving to Ferrari, the same issue remains: finding the perfect balance between front-end grip and a level of oversteer he can comfortably control. As a result, his biggest struggle in corners has been unpredictability at the apex, which then compromises traction on corner exit. Ricciardo's case is even more severe. Despite having a naturally smooth driving style, he struggled to adapt to the understeer-heavy characteristics because his gentle braking approach couldn't generate enough front-end grip. When he tried to become more aggressive to compensate, it ended up damaging his overall driving style. Ricciardo was never quite the same driver after 2022. Not every driver suffered as badly as Hamilton or Ricciardo under these regulations, but the majority of the grid agrees on one thing. Ground effect cars are extremely sensitive to even the smallest changes, and their overall handling is simply not enjoyable. Compared to the previous era, drivers had far more freedom to explore and express their individual driving styles. The cars were more consistent, more predictable, and noticeably more agile through corners. In the ground effect era, however, the extreme aerodynamic sensitivity of the cars forces drivers to be far more cautious behind the wheel. When this is combined with Pirelli tires that are also highly sensitive to temperature changes and track surface conditions, it often leaves drivers feeling confused rather than confident. What we've seen more frequently in recent seasons is that lap times can actually be more competitive when drivers drive the car smoothly and calmly, rather than pushing aggressively. Inconsistent grip and overly sensitive cars are more than enough reasons for drivers to leave the ground effect era behind without missing it. Engineers in Formula One have faced similar frustrations. In the previous era, car development was relatively straightforward. Add more downforce, and performance would almost always improve. Since 2022, that logic has changed completely. A fast car is no longer defined by who generates the most downforce, but by who can distribute it most consistently and build the most stable platform across different circuits. Ground effect works by generating downforce through the Venturi effect, using high-speed airflow passing through tunnels underneath the car's floor. As airflow speed increases, air pressure drops, which in turn creates downforce. The problem is that airflow inside these Venturi tunnels is extremely sensitive. Even the smallest changes, in speed, track surface, or corner type, can dramatically affect performance, resulting in a very narrow setup window. One of the most visible consequences during the early implementation was porpoising. When downforce reached its peak, the floor would hit the track surface, causing aerodynamic stall repeatedly and creating a violent bouncing effect that was extremely uncomfortable for drivers. Ironically, maximum performance required running the floor as close to the asphalt as possible, which left teams struggling to find solutions to control porpoising. This is also why disqualifications related to excessive skid block wear have become far more common since 2022. The demand to run extremely low ride heights pushes teams to the limit. A recent example was McLaren's double disqualification in Las Vegas, highlighting just how fine the margins have become. Ultimately, making a ground effect car competitive requires not only a deep understanding of aerodynamics, but also a highly refined suspension setup to keep the platform stable. And that complexity is precisely why many drivers and engineers will not look back fondly on the ground effect era. One of the most common issues teams face is the difficulty of finding proper correlation between what happens on track and what is predicted by the wind tunnel or simulator. It is almost impossible to perfectly replicate how the car reacts to changes in balance, track conditions, or even temperature differences, even with the most advanced simulation tools available. Performance is no longer about generating massive amounts of downforce, but about how that downforce is distributed and how the aerodynamic balance transitions across different speeds and corner types. This is why, in the ground effect era, upgrades don't always deliver instant performance gains on track. Quite often, new components actually turn into a downgrade or make the car harder to drive. In many cases, simulations and wind tunnel data show significant improvements on paper. But what teams fail to detect is that every gain comes with a compromise in another area. One that simply doesn't show up in the numbers until the car hits the circuit. Only two teams have truly executed the ground effect regulation successfully: Red Bull and McLaren. Red Bull, in particular, became the pioneer with its suspension design and highly efficient aerodynamic distribution. That concept was later adopted by McLaren and further developed over the past 2 years. In fact, Red Bull has largely reached a development ceiling since last season, partly due to ongoing wind tunnel correlation issues. McLaren's recent rise is no coincidence. They operate a more advanced wind tunnel, and team principal Andrea Stella found a way to maximize data correlation. One key approach was making major upgrades to the driver in the loop simulator and prioritizing driver feedback from those simulations as the foundation of car development, before validating everything with wind tunnel data. Looking ahead, the return of a flatter floor in the 2026 regulations is expected to reduce or even eliminate many of the negative characteristics of the current cars. While there are no guarantees that the 2026 cars will be more enjoyable, due to the heavy demands of energy management, at the very least, aerodynamics and overall handling are expected to be a clear improvement over the ground effect era. That's it from us. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more Formula One content.